We're all the question people.
Let's see. I think we're just missing Corey and Jaina. So we can give it another minute.
Who else is here? Eric's here.
I am here.
Oh, there are people here.
Yeah, there's 16 people here now, 17.
Yeah, Eric's here.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for doing this.
Of course.
Yeah, thanks for coming.
So a lot of you guys don't know Eric. That was Eric Schull. He's the chair of the department right now.
That's me.
That's Eric. It's Mike.
Hello.
Everybody, who's that?
Jaina's coming in.
I see Jaina. Hi, Jaina.
I'm going to unmute Jaina. So one request, everyone just keep your mics muted, except for the speakers, the guests. And if you have questions, just type them in the chat, and either they will see it or I can get to it later and ask the questions. Looks like Corey is joining us. That should be
Power's late as usual.
Oh, how surprising.
classic Corey.
Happy birthday, Mike.
Hey, thank you.
It's your birthday, Mike? Happy birthday.
Yeah.
Thanks
You're
for
over
doing this
30
on your
yet?
What'd you say, Adam?
You're over 30 yet?
Yeah. 33 loops around the sun today.
Oh,
Wow.
getting up there.
Yeah, I know.
Getting old. Cool. So it looks like Corey's here. All right, everyone's here.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah. All right, so thank you for joining us today, for all the guests and the students as well. Looks like we've got a variety of students from different levels of the concentration, which is really nice. And Dagny's here, part-time staff, recent alum. So yeah, I think I saw Emily here too, Emily Page. So we've got some instructors here as well. So yeah, this is really awesome. Thank you guys for doing this. I've prepared some questions, and we can kind of start with that, and then see where it goes. I'm hearing my voice.
I am too. Tony.
It's too many mics open.
Yeah, I'm hearing an echo. Okay. No, I still hear it. God, tech issues. Okay, I'll just live with it. All right, so one of the reasons we brought all of you together is because, one, you're all semi-recent alum. I think Ian was the first to graduate, is that right? 06, 07?
05.
05, okay.
Yeah.
And Jane is the most recent to graduate.
Actually, Lawrence is the first.
Lawrence, when did you graduate? Were you 05?
No, I was later. I was 7 or 8, I think.
Okay. So yeah, everyone's within the last 15 years, and I think another thing that's unique is you all stayed in Chicago and are working as DPs in Chicago. And I kind of want to just start off with that. So I'll open this up to any of you. After school, a lot of people either go to New York or LA, and I'm just curious, what options did you weigh after you graduated, and what were some of the deciding factors in staying in Chicago?
Who wants to take that?
I'll call on someone. Mike Bove.
Yeah, I'm not going to have a great answer for this because I truthfully didn't have any sort of plan once I graduated, to be honest with you. So I stuck around. I had a girlfriend at the time. My family was close. I had a job at the lighting stage, and just figuring out what to do after college is complicated enough. I never really thought too much about leaving. I after that year, within the year after graduating, that I worked at the school, I was able to call up enough contacts to start freelancing here. And that just, one thing led to another, and I never left. So.
Yeah, I'll jump in off of that too. I never considered an option immediately after leaving school to go anywhere else because it was hard enough to get jobs good without having enough contacts here in the city. The very few that I did have, it was nice to sprinkle in the freelance work, but similar to Mike, I currently had like a part-time job working at the stage. So I held that, and it didn't make sense to me not having any money and being 22 years old to uproot myself to some other city where I didn't know anybody to work for, where I would have to be scrambling and probably having to take work outside of the film industry just to get by, which I knew I didn't want to do. I knew staying here, at least I could use the contacts I had to start building up like a network of people to work with.
I could hop in there too. I think the other piece, because both Corey and I all graduated around the same time, that was when the recession hit. So I think that also played a huge role in some of the decisions that we made. But same thing for me. I think along with Bove, I didn't have like a huge plan, and a lot of it was just like, oh man, I need to make money right now. So you're just trying to kind of work on whatever sets that we could. And also at that time, CineSpace didn't exist. So the whole entire kind of landscape was a lot different. So I think
but we
for me
also,
anyway, like our options were limited.
We graduated at this time too, Mike, where this was right at when, you remember, all the post companies started opening up their own production companies, and they were just kind of like hungry and looking for young talent. So there was a bit of timing there too. You start getting booked on like commercial jobs, which are fairly lucrative. And you're like, oh, well, okay, I can just make this work then. You hear stories about people going to LA and struggling, and meanwhile, like, the commercial market here was booming with all these new companies forming and stuff. So, to me, it didn't really make sense to move after like a year. So,
yeah, that's true. To jump in off of that as well, is like that's also the timing that we had with. That was the year that the DSLR took off. So suddenly, all these little productions started popping up that weren't there before. So there was more work for, like Mike Bove was just saying, for young upstarts to have, the opportunity to work on professional sets because of that, because people were doing lower budget stuff because of the 5D. It opened up, more productions were happening than, probably had before.
Yeah, and truthfully for me too, like that. Oh, I'm sorry, I just interrupted someone.
No, go ahead.
The 5D thing, like I ended up getting a random contact through this other person, and these two people ended up forming a production company that had like a pretty meteoric rise, and it was mainly because of like 5D technology and being able to leverage that into making things look more expensive than they were, basically. So
yeah, and I think even in the TV show and picture market, there was, I think when I graduated, a pretty decent tax incentive across the Midwest. I mean, Iowa had a 50% tax rebate. Michigan had a pretty good incentive. So just from contacts out of Columbia, I jumped, I was loading on a couple features right when I graduated. And, for me, there was enough work in the Midwest area, even on the bigger stuff. And so I think timing wise, it was also good, a good time to be on the shows. And even, and since then, the incentives haven't gone away. Obviously Chicago has definitely grown in the larger scale market.
You guys bring up two really important things that I was going to touch on throughout this is timing and technology. So this, I could just segue into one of my other questions in terms of timing. This is for Ian and Jana. So Ian, you graduated in 05, and Jana.
Sorry, that was actually 09.
Oh, you were 09.
Yeah.
So then Lawrence, you were 08?
Yeah.
Okay. So, the film industry was very different at the time that you guys graduated than it was for Jana. So I guess if you can, talk about your experiences coming out of school. Like Mike Weldon mentioned, CineSpace didn't exist and things like that. And for people that are graduating this year, those things do exist, and it's a different landscape. So let's talk about that, and then Jana, let's talk about your experiences in the last few years.
Yeah, when my experience was pretty similar to what was brought up already, with like mostly what I was doing was low budget commercials initially, and then TV started to pop off a few years later. And I was, mostly crewing on, the first few TV shows that were here and the occasional features that were coming through town. And then mixed with that was a little bit of reality TV, and then a lot of indie features, kind of, jumping from being a camera assistant on, various low budget indies back to back to back. And then that kind of got me into the world that I stuck into, which was, getting connected with Joe and directing, working with him as a DP down the road. But that was like, something like 8 years before that kind of transitioned into that kind of work. So yeah, initially it was I was doing every kind of job. I worked at Film Gear for a while, loading trucks and stuff. I was kind of all over the place. But then it kind of started to funnel into like a very specific kind of work, especially once the TV shows kind of arrived and CineSpace kind of built itself, and there was more of there was enough work to kind of stick to one thing and pursue that. But it's still like kind of a mishmash of different opportunities come up and different stuff. Also, Lawrence was doing the 3D stuff, and I got in with that, and that was kind of took me out of Chicago for a while. I was traveling a bunch for that stuff. That was like the most travel I got out of my career for a while. Otherwise, I've mostly been here in Chicago.
Yeah, Jana, can you talk about your experience? Because it's, like I said, the industry is very different in Chicago today than it was 10, 12 years ago.
And it's actually really funny because my first professional set was Win It All, which Eon was the DP for, who's here with us today, so that's cool. I was pretty lucky in the fact that it was pretty booming when I was in school, so I was on Win It All my summer before junior year, so I got to make some really great connections and work with these DPs here even when I was in school. So when it came to graduation, I already had a network of people I was ACing for. So I didn't really see a need to leave as well, because I mean, working on commercials, especially when you're in college and you're getting those big paychecks, it's kind of a nice little shock into adulthood of like, whoa, I actually have money. I'm not broke anymore. So I didn't really see a need to leave because of that. And yeah, right after graduation, I AC 3 features in a row, which I would not recommend. Don't do 3 features in a row. But I was pretty gung-ho about getting myself out there and just saying yes to everything, and then slowly learning that you definitely should say no to some things. But yeah, the culture of where I graduated was just, I was pretty fortunate in that like everyone I've met, everyone in Chicago especially, are very like people that have got your back in a way. So everyone I've worked with have been pretty nice and pretty like, we throw each other's names around, and yeah, it's been pretty chill. I don't know how to, yeah.
No, that's great.
One other thing I want to touch on, just in terms of like staying here versus going elsewhere, is at the end of the day, so many of these decisions, it boils down to a lifestyle decision that you make. And I think that's very important. I think everyone has to define that for themselves differently. Going out to LA, it's like, there's just more people out there doing this. The rates are lower. It's a lot more of a grind, a lot more of a struggle. If you have certain desires that you want to do in your life outside of film, all of these things kind of play into, your decision of where you want to plant your flag.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up lifestyle, and Ian brought up travel. A lot of you guys are traveling for work. Mike Weldon's Instagram is the best. He all over the world. So have you found, or do you believe that that sort of lifestyle is easier because you're in Chicago? Like, would it be more challenging to be traveling so much if you were based in New York or LA?
I think so much of it is, again, like what Beau said, just kind of up to you, and a lot of it's like luck. For me personally, that's like a lot of why I stayed here. I think I'm originally from Philadelphia. I moved here for Columbia and never planned on staying, and then I just kind of did. Chicago, in terms of the three major cities, in my opinion, is probably the cheapest one and the like easiest to live in and kind of have that lifestyle. So I think speaking to that, it's like if you're interested in doing a lot of other things with your life and kind of I don't know, not grinding like so intensely, that worked really well for me. So I was able to kind of like put a lot of my interest in film and then also do a lot of other things. And then I got very lucky and was able to kind of combine my travel interest into film as well. So that's like, I mean, I've been here for a long time, and that's one of the big reasons why I didn't leave, because it's not easy, but I think it's easier than being in New York or in LA to kind of do those things, for sure.
Yeah, I agree with that as well. A lot of the people I talk to, not everybody, but a lot of the people I talk to who have gone to LA to work complain that they almost never sleep in their own bed. They're working on projects in cities like Chicago and getting pushed around the country a lot. A lot of stuff is moving away from LA. A few of them get lucky and get on shows and stuff where they're there, but they spend a lot of their time commuting. So, you know, it is nice to have enough work to keep me here, but as Mike pointed out, like, you know, the niche that he's gotten into, he's traveling all the time, and it just kind of depends on where you find yourself. I know plenty of people who live here and they're spending long stretches of time elsewhere. But I think the big difference between here versus New York or LA is that I think a lot of people brought this up. The overhead is so much lower. You can keep your expenses really low relatively and be able to, you know, cruise by on a much more meager budget. And the people I know who live in those other cities are, you know, bless them, they're just having to work that much harder to keep the lights on. So it's a give and take. The work is definitely out there and the opportunities are there, but being here, I've definitely found like a really inexpensive lifestyle that allows me to take the time for myself when I want it. So I definitely wouldn't trade that for anything.
Yeah, I think lifestyle is an important thing to remember. Like, you know, we're not making films is not the lifestyle, and I think in school that's kind of the mindset. And you know, now that Mike Weldon is in his mid-30s and I'm approaching 40, like at least personally, I feel like my priorities and worldview are different than they were at 22. So, you know, these things can evolve too, but it is important to take into account just their quality of life and not just only think about shooting.
If I could add another thought to that too,
Yeah.
as far as traveling for work, is part of it of like where you're, you know, the geography of where you live is the appeal to like clients that you have. Like, for instance, like one of my bigger clients over the years was NFL Films. And because I'm in Chicago, it was appealing to them to hire me as a freelancer because I was within driving distance of, you know, 5 different organizations as far as teams go, being located in the Midwest. So it's easier for them to just call me up for any shoots they have in those cities that I can get to easier than if they have to fly someone cross country, whether they're out in New Jersey, or if they're flying at, you know, one of their other guys from like LA. Being centrally located in the country helps as far as like my appeal as a freelancer. So that's like another thing to consider based on like where you live.
Yeah, I definitely second that.
So Adam has a question.
Yeah. So when you guys got out of school, is when the Red and the more high-end digital cameras. I mean, when you guys got out of film, was still primarily the what was used as a format. So the digital up and coming digital help with work.
I think yes, absolutely, because you saw this quantum leap in sensor technology in a very short span of time, and suddenly, as a young person, you're able to create images on the same level as any sort of high-end professional. And so I think, yeah, the democratization of the technology not only helped people like me and any of us on this call, but also like these fledgling new production companies, also who are staffed by young people, help them get work as well. So yeah, I think that's a huge factor.
Yeah, I'm glad Adam brought up tech, because that was going to be my next subject. Is sorry, I'm just checking my notes right here.
Lawrence would be a good one to talk about that question.
Yeah. Hey, we'll start with Lawrence and then we'll open it up to the group. So in my experience, I would say that half of the things I know technologically, I learned after school, and that's nothing against the curriculum. It's just that, like Mike was saying, it evolves so quickly. Like, for example, the Red wasn't even a company until 2 or 3 years after I graduated. So that's just my experience. So I guess we'll start with Lawrence. How did you keep up to date and relevant with the technology, and how do you still do that as it keeps evolving?
Yeah, so when I was going to Columbia, I mean, everything we did for the most part, and predominantly why I went there was, I think, the access to the film equipment and being able to have that base knowledge and foundation. When I was in high school, the Panasonic DVX 100 had come out, and I think that was the first camera, that had a 24p imager that really changed the market and started to build into more of a cinema look, right? And then Super 35 digital sensors slowly evolved. At first it was a lot of like the Red Rock and Lettuce adapters, and everyone was trying to get that same depth of field. But yeah, I mean, I had a DVX kind of on my own in college that evolved. And at the time, at Columbia, the digital side wasn't as developed. But, I think just for me, it was just, I always was interested in the tech world, even outside of school. So I think just being plugged in at the, forums were really big at the time. And I think when digital was really starting to take off, like, DVX, Red, they both had pretty evolved online presence. And then as the cameras started to roll out, for a while it was the Red. And then when Arri came on the scene, that really, just having the legacy from the film cameras, everybody was sort of wondering what film camera companies were going to come out with digital cameras. For a while, Panavision was toying around with a digital camera, and that didn't fully come to light until something they did later with Red. But yeah, there was just a lot of like what's going to happen. I think Peter Jackson really kind of helped put. You look at the players that are out in the industry, and you just kind of stay up to date with who's doing what. I think it's in a lot of ways. I often, when I'm talking to somebody that's not in the film business, just kind of talk about like when Instagram first came out, you had like, maybe 5 filters you could choose and apply something to your image. And now, the number of apps and the number of paintbrush options there are, in the same way, like having this diverse amount of equipment, you just have to look at like how am I trying to tell a story, much in the same way with film stock you did on film cameras. With digital, it's that combination of sensors, lenses, cameras. So really it's a lot more testing, a lot more getting in, to a place like this and coming and testing out the equipment. So yeah, I mean, it's a lot to keep up with, but I think in the technology, across the board, it continues to evolve.
I do have a question in the chat about working in Chicago, and we'll come back to the tech stuff because I have a few more questions. So this is for anyone. Can you talk about how the work is in Chicago during the winter time? and how that differs from different
I
seasons.
mean, in the last however many years, it really doesn't vary that much anymore. It used to be that the work would consolidate around the summertime. You'd get like all the features and stuff kind of happening all at once. But now it's consistent, and it's just about what, provided it doesn't drop like to 30 below zero. I don't think there's ever any slowdown. So it's all about kind of equipping yourself to be able to work in any environment, any kind of circumstances you can. But yeah, I feel like there is some little bit of slowdown, but I mean, honestly, the TV world especially, and commercials too, it really doesn't take too much of a hit. Oftentimes there's even big rushes of work in the January time or whatever. End of the year, there's always a push because a bunch of companies are trying to burn money before the fiscal year ends. Like, there's all kinds of reasons for it to maintain, regardless of,
Super Bowl commercials and things like that.
Super Bowl commercials, yeah, all that stuff. So yeah, and there's just as many movies and TV shows that work year round or are here because it's wintertime in Chicago. It's just, just the way it is.
I think it all depends too on like what world you're working in. Like Ian's saying about, TV shows. I mean, they're still shooting throughout if you're working in that world, but if you work in something else, maybe it's slower for you. Like I usually would anticipate, January is going to be really slow. And some years it is, but then one year I had it that it was my busiest month of the year. So it all kind of depends on who you're working for at the time and what kind of work you're seeking.
I definitely agree with that.
I would just to add to that. I mean, I think just in tracking, equipment that goes out over the last 10 years, I mean, it slows down on the commercial side for sure, January, February, but there's always other content being produced. But in general, I think, I'm sure less out of town people that want to come film in Chicago in the winter.
Weldon?
I was just going to agree with that. It slows down a little bit sometimes for the commercial world, and occasionally, like whatever, they're putting their budgets together. But I just wanted to add that depending on what world you're plugged in, that also can be a pretty busy time for narrative work, especially lower budget stuff where you're trying to maybe call in some favors or do something like that. That's usually a good time to do that because it is a little bit slower and people are a little more willing to like work for slightly less money or whatever in January and February than they would be in, like, say, July or something like that. So that's also something to keep in mind if you have your own project or whatever.
And tying that back into the technology, probably a good time also, to spend time catching up on the tech and doing tests, things like that. I mean, then more than ever, you have potentially more downtime.
Yeah, I would also agree with Weldon on the narrative side. I've noticed in the past 2 years that I've been shooting that January and February is often my busiest short film time. I've shot 4 in January and February this year. So it definitely is a time where people that aren't as busy with the commercial world can take the time to create more narrative pieces. So.
Cool. That's all good news. So I'm gonna jump back to the tech discussion. So can you talk about the advancements in technology and how that's impacted your workflow on set, and how the technology has influenced your creative approach and the aesthetic that you're trying to create? I'll start with Ian, because I think Easy is a good example of LED technology.
Yeah. I wasn't even thinking about that, but that's made a huge difference in what we're doing. I mean, aside from the camera end, which is obviously changing a lot, it feels like it's starting to plateau a little bit. The technology we worked with last year is kind of working off of what is coming out the next year and so forth. So, with that kind of stuff, the expectations are at least a little bit more rounded out, versus where things were when we graduated, where it was like everything was changing so much, so quickly, and we were having to adapt to like brand new systems. But yeah, I mean, when we did Easy and stuff, we got more and more as time went by. We were becoming more dependent on like the LED technology and lights for getting that show done, because so much of it was run and gun. We wouldn't be able to rig as often as we wanted to ahead of the shooting day. So, you know, we were often, you know, very dependent on a set of Astera tubes and some Astras and stuff like that, light panels and light mats and all that kind of stuff, and just kind of flying with it as it came up. And also the final season we switched to the Gemini, which is mainly because of its higher sensitivity, because so much of that show was night exterior available light, night interior available light, you know, working largely with practicals and what the location was offering us. So, you know, as that stuff evolved, we kind of did our best to react to the newer tools that were available to us. You know, with the show like that, where you're running for many seasons, the producers don't want you to change anything of the formula as you go. But because of the nature of that show, because it was constantly shifting in every way, we were kind of allowed to be as adaptive with the technology as you know was permitted at the time. So, you know, that was a big part of doing that show, was experimentation and kind of keeping up with things. But I think that's true with any project. It's like whatever you have at your disposal, it's like you got to take advantage of it, because, you know, some tools will make your life easier and some tools will complicate things, but like unless you're actively kind of seeking those things, you're not gonna discover what the advantages and disadvantages are. And, you know, there was a lot of stuff we tested out that just did, you know, that we were hoping would save our lives and didn't be the savior that we thought. So, you know, it's all kinds of give and take. You know, some of those LEDs can't reproduce certain colors very well. So, you know, it's like it can do every color in the spectrum, but it can't really do yellow, you know, stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah.
So I'm curious how much the LED technology influenced the creative decisions by Joe, the director.
Mm-hmm.
For example, you know, you guys would do long steady cam shots throughout a space, and you were able to adjust lights on the fly and things like that. Do you think if that show was made 20 years ago where you didn't have that technology, the choice would have been made to do those extra long takes?
Yes and no. Sometimes, you know, we weren't being restricted by lighting decisions for those pieces. You know, there was quite a few that we did where it was, you know, either all practicals or all available light, daylight kind of situation. So it wasn't really lighting dependent at all. But we did do a shot towards the end of the third season that you know, is I think like a 7-minute long Steadicam shot that goes through this whole complex, and it took us, you know, most of the day to accomplish that shot, including the lighting and stuff. And, you know, we were seeing every kind of corner of that space. It's a long kind of walk through a corridor and all these rooms, you know, kind of going in and out, and we see them from multiple different angles. So, you know, we didn't have a lot of options in terms of like where to stick lights. I think we could have done it without, but it would have taken much more time. We would have had to have access to the space way ahead of the day. I mean, with those LEDs, my gaffer, Christian Mejia, who's also a Columbia grad, He designed a really versatile system for the stereotubes where it was just like a sheet of chloroplast and some Velcro, and we could just kind of put those up very quickly wherever they needed to be, and they're battery operated. That being the biggest thing, is that, you know, they could run on battery for hours and hours and hours without having to run any power to them. So putting them up on ceilings and stuff was really quick and really easy. So yeah, I mean, it made stuff like that possible without having to you know, add a ton of time and money to a scene. It would be really quick and really self-contained.
Does anyone else have thoughts or I guess, yeah, opinions on how your workflow has changed with the technology advancements, either practically or aesthetically? I think Ian covered it. Oh, go ahead.
I would say I mean, this is nothing new because the technology's been around for a while now, but like one of the frustrating things I mean, there's the ease and flexibility that Ian was talking about as far as like having to be adaptable, but the other side of it is like a lot of the decisions that probably would have been made before as far as like creative choices in it is just like aren't being made, as far as it's too many times now it's just shoot everything and they'll figure it out later, because you're not worried about the amount of film stock you have, you just continuously roll and the decisions just aren't being made actively on the set, and it's just all, well, what are we kind of getting here? It's like, we'll get everything, we'll figure it out in the edit, which is from a creative standpoint and practicality standpoint is frustrating, working on our end for that, at least in my experience. For instance, like one last thought is like for like a doc show that I was shooting, we shot like throughout most of the entire season of the show, and we were getting down to like one of our last shoots of it, and I was asked the producer about like, well, and that was our approach the entire time, was I just needed to shoot and cover everything. They were never specific about what they needed out of each day that we were getting. And I would ask them, I'm like, well, what do we need to get today? I'm like, did I get what you needed, in the last shoot? And they're like, oh, well, we haven't even watched any of it yet. So it's just like, those are the kinds of things that happen like with this technology, where it's just shoot, get everything, and then we'll figure it out later, which I think is a detriment to whatever the project is that you're working on.
Corey, you're saying there's less prep going on?
A little bit.
Oh,
yeah.
God, yeah.
Yeah.
What is prep? There's no prep anymore.
You don't even need a location scout, man. Fuck it.
Yeah, they'll just send you photos.
That is the worst. And then the photo, it's like the bad. You don't even see what you need to see, and you're like, okay, great. That tells me nothing. Cool. Thanks for that.
We all don't have strong opinions about that at all.
One real thing that Ian kind of mentioned, that all the changes in technology, really they've just enabled you to work faster, and producers you're just expected to work a lot faster than you used to be, but you're also at the same time able to, because you no longer have to gel that light. You just pick up your phone and change the color. So in terms of speed, all this has just made everything people expect things a lot speedier now, and they expect that high quality in this new time frame. You just don't have as much time as you used to finagle things. So
I was gonna say, well, you're talking about LEDs, is it kind of totally limits to your looks.
At times yes, at times no. I did this shoot, it was like a year and a half ago now, but as we were doing it, I had this realization, is like, I don't know how we would have pulled this creative off even just a year ago, because we were 100% dependent on stereotubes for a bunch of wild colors and stuff. And I was thinking about the time it would take to pre-light or even just gel the lights on the day. It just would not have been possible to do this just a year prior. So that's just that, there is something to that, Adam. Yeah. But at the same time, it does open up, I think, a whole new host of creative possibilities that you can't achieve. So I think that's an okay trade-off in a way.
Okay.
I'd like to add on that real quick too, just something that hasn't been mentioned with it. When you're shooting a lot of things, I think in the commercial world sometimes, but especially on like lower budget narratives, like budget comes into it. LEDs are very expensive. So as much like I appreciate all that technology, but I just want to mention that it is important to, I don't know, still appreciate like the old school stuff and know how to, like, you can still achieve similar looks with that. So I guess like if you're ever on something and you want to do something wild, it's still possible. It'll just be harder and take more time. But I don't know. I just want to mention that because that comes up a lot where you're like, oh, cool. I know how to do this crazy shot that you guys want to do. And this is how much it'll cost. And then it's always like, oh, well, we only have half of that. So then you have to figure out a way to make it work.
Well,
Yeah,
that-
and a lot of that new stuff is real expensive or next to hard to find. I mean, until it's been out for a while, sometimes it just nobody owns it, and like the people who do, you can't afford to rent it. So, you know, it can that can be very limiting. We definitely were doing a lot of really kind of film schooly cheap options for all kinds of stuff that we wish we had like a whole arsenal of LEDs to put on the ceiling, but instead we used China balls because we couldn't afford to rent that many, or they just weren't available to us.
So I have a question, sticking with the topic of technology. I know a lot of you own your own equipment, cameras, lenses, lights. So I guess the question is this something you recommend for young filmmakers? Is it something you recommend for people that want to start a career as a DP? And if so, what do you recommend? What's the best method and approach?
I'll start. I think, especially in this panel, there's a wide range of people who have made decisions to go different roads on this. I think Lawrence could probably speak the most to this topic. I'm personally am not really interested in owning gear. Just again, I think it's kind of comes down to like a lifestyle thing, but also like just the wide variety of technology I've had to use on various shoots. I've never been able to settle on, taking a giant loan out to buy something that I don't even am sure I will use. But I have invested in a good set of sticks, a good head, lenses, stuff like that, but like still very minimally. I recommend it if you feel like you found the thing that will get you work and like get you moving, but it's also not a necessity to have to own a whole bunch of different cameras, because there's always a way, but then that ends up being you're the guy who's constantly asking for favors to like get the camera that you need to shoot the short film or whatever it is that you're doing on a meager budget. So it's all got its give and take, but that's been my experience.
My thoughts on that, and to just let everyone on this chat know, me and Corey co-own all of our gear, so sometimes it makes sense to partner up with someone to limit your exposure, should things not go well. But I am a proponent of owning your own gear. I think it's it's important. There's this sort of sense out there. It's like, well, I'm a good enough DP. I don't need my own gear. You hire me because of me. Yes, there is that for sure. At the same time, if you have a piece of gear, your negotiating and leveraging power goes up a lot, I think. And I'm finding now in these coronavirus times, it's really kind of nice to have an Alexa Mini. That's like a huge asset. Clearly, I had no idea this was coming, but when Corey and I got our first Alexa, I was able to roll that into the feature that I shot. And I would not have been able to do that via renting because, it was an indie feature and they had no money, blah, blah, blah. So, we both wanted to invest in that technology because we knew our work would end up looking better and get us to the next step. So, it worked for me, but yeah, like Ian said, it's certainly not for everyone. I mean, we took like a huge financial risk, quite honestly, and it was pretty scary. But that is what it is. I was ready to take the plunge, but I can understand the hesitation.
Yeah, like Mike's saying, I'm obviously a proponent for it as well, because I've done it and continue to invest in more gear, and it's a big bargaining chip as far as like getting work and getting known as a person that has the gear. And like, for instance, one of the things before was like in doing it at the right time is I referenced working for NFL Films before, like not long after Mike and I had bought, we got an Alexa, was right at the time period that which they've only shot Super 16 through basically all film 16 and 35 millimeters since they started. But around that time, which was like 2012, they were starting to transition into digital technology. And their thing was like they were exploring shooting on Alexa and basically just Arri products. And what they were looking for, like how I first got hired, is they knew I was an Alexa DP, is the way they looked at it. And they wanted someone that was proficient in that specific technology. So because of that, and knowing that I had the gear, that brought up my appeal to get my foot in the door there to be used for it. And the other thing too is like when you own gear is, I've found too, a lot of some of my clients that I work for they're doing big projects. They have big clients, but their company is only like 1 or 2 people. So like when they hire me, if they're able to just call me up and I, already have the gear and then can source the rest of the gear myself because of like relationships I have with Lawrence's shop and can put it all together, is I'm a one-stop shop then for my client, and they just call me up, I have the gear, and like that is attractive to my clients, that's less legwork that they have to do, and it's easier for them to call up me and hire me because I already have those pieces in place versus calling someone else up and being like, all right, now you have to organize the gear as well as the client because you hired, like, say, a DP that doesn't own their own gear, just for example.
Yeah, I think Ian brought up a good point. Investing in support gear is another way to go. So if you are going to buy gear, every shoot is going to need a tripod and lenses, no matter what the camera is. So, that's kind of an option there.
I was also going to say that you use your gear as a negotiating, for rates.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of times the whole crew's rates are going to be based on your rate. So if you're using your gear to negotiate with, it affects everybody.
Weldon, I cut you off there. Did you have
That's all right. I was just it is a really interesting, I don't know. It's just a crazy question that I think is, it's so personal. So I'm kind of agreeing with everybody else here. I don't really own any gear. I'm more like Eon, where I have a few small things. I have a monitor and like whatever else. And I think for me, it just comes down to like lifestyle. And then I think it is also a little bit about the work that you want to chase. And I found, like, similar to Eon, that and the jobs that I do, I've used like so many different types of cameras and like everything's so different that I never was like comfortable enough being like, yes, I'm going to purchase this and that's going to like be perfect for every job. However, there are like a bunch of great benefits to doing that, and you can use it as a leveraging point. I think another thing to point out with that, though, sometimes, which I don't know if Corey and both have experienced, but I do think with some of it, like there is this thing that can sometimes happen when you own your own gear, and then you sort of get like lowballed a lot with your rate. So it's like, hey, we're this production company, we want to do this this commercial for cheap. Like, we know that you own a camera, so we're going to hire you and the camera, and we're going to like discount it greatly for that reason. So I think that's like something to be aware of at that sometimes too. Ultimately, like, it doesn't really matter because you're still getting money, but it's like how much your camera package is actually worth versus whatever.
Yeah, your camera's never going to rent for the rate you want it to ever. And you just have to be comfortable with that.
So, yeah.
Yeah, Weldon brought up a good point.
I can add to that if you want.
Go ahead, Lawrence.
Kind of tie it back to the gear heavy side. So when I graduated, I decided I wanted to invest in. I had a DVX, and I kind of decided at the time, when Red was really the camera, to invest into that. And at a certain point, I was like, well, I'm either going to go the DP route, or I wouldn't mind going the rental house route. I kind of like initially was sort of looking at it as a two different tracked mindset. Yeah, I think having equipment definitely can help you get jobs, and I would definitely encourage you as a DP, especially if you're somebody who needs gear in your hands to like go out and just be motivated to stay creative. You know, and so many DPs I'm sure have told you just to go shoot, you know, so what does that look for you? You know, what does that look like to you? How do you have relationships developed either with a rental house, or somebody has gear, or if you're just someone you know that you need to have a piece of equipment to maintain, you know, your level of creativity and to be able to practice things in your house during a pandemic that's, you know, it's going to drive you crazy to not be able to continue shooting, then yeah, buy a camera. I mean, the quality of camera that you buy, you know, I would encourage people to like definitely have something that they can, you know, frame, shoot. I mean, even DSLRs, you know, are the image is fine for a lot of things. From a practicing standpoint, you know, definitely be sure to develop relationships with rental houses no matter where you're at. I think that is a huge asset that often gets, you know, overlooked by some DPs. And if you're buying equipment and deciding to buy something, you know, on the higher end level, having a good relationship with a rental house or some place where you may go park that equipment, you know, as Corey was mentioning, is important to have that, you know, relationship be a partnership where you can, you know, when you have other jobs, you know, there are other pieces of technology that you're going to need. And that way you're not also getting in a mind track of just locking yourself into, I always know I have to shoot on Alexa Mini with this lens set, and I can still be creative and still, you know, actually know that there are, you know, different jobs that will require different looks, and not to lock yourself into kind of like I got to get my gear rented. You know, if that's what the focus is, you just have to also reflect on like, am I losing track of like how I'm developing my, you know, my career, my ability as a cinematographer. So something to keep in mind as you're, you know, looking at equipment. But yeah, I mean, I think it can work either way. You know, if you don't own any gear, just, you know, make sure you're still staying active in some way and keeping up with your skills. But form good relationships with rental houses and form good relationships, you know, and with people that own the equipment. I think that relationships at the end of the day, you know, will be what it comes down to. But you need to practice. You know, with any profession, there's ongoing practice that you need to kind of maintain, and so do what you need to do to do that.
I'll mirror what Lawrence just said, and a big part of Corey and I, you know, like in terms of what gear to invest in, there's no possible way I can answer that. That's a huge discussion, but as someone who kind of went for like the Ferrari of cameras in a way, you know, we knew that we were going to be able to consign it with Lawrence, which was a huge attractive option to us. Had that not been the case, we may have chose differently. So.
Yeah, and with what Lawrence is saying is like it's absolutely like pertinent that you do have that relationship with a rental house, because the amount of times where I didn't need to supplement what I already owned are very, very few as far as like what the needs of the shoot are. It's rare where I get a call, I'm just like, oh, I have absolutely everything we need. I don't need to rent any other additional items. And the other thing too is having the good relationship is so many times like productions, they drag their feet as far as knowing what they want, and they call you at like 4:30 when the shoot's the next day, and suddenly you need all this other gear that you didn't think you needed before. So then it's like having that relationship is like with like Lawrence and his shop is like the amount of times they've saved my ass as far as like scrambling to help me get the gear I need. I would have never been able to do that if it was just me on my own and I didn't already have these relationships established.
It seems to me like the takeaway is, you know, what Weldon said. It's a personal question. It's a personal decision. Just like, you know, deciding to stay in Chicago. You have to think about what your goal is and how you want to achieve that goal, and factor that into whether it's investing in gear or moving to a city or something.
It's like
so there's
anything
no wrong
else.
answer.
Yeah, you have to, it's a risk, and you have to assess that risk. you know, some people are risk averse, some people are risk loving, and it all depends on the person.
You're a card player, Mike.
I call myself risk neutral, which I think
Yeah.
is where you kind of want to be. You're right in the middle. You make smart decisions.
Right. So I'm gonna move on to another topic. You know, obviously these are crazy times, and we kind of have to talk about it a little bit. So, you know, with the new guidelines for reopening the country, reopening the industry, those sort of things are starting to roll out. How do you think it will affect certain productions like commercials and things like that? And in addition, how do you think it'll affect indie features, TV shows? Just in general, what do you foresee, and how are you approaching it?
I could speak a little bit on it. I've been, I'm a board member with AICP, which is a commercial group here, national group, and then also part of a rental house group called Production Equipment Rental Group, or PERG. And we've been having a lot of meetings kind of related to this topic. And I think just nationally, there's been a lot of meetings going on just to try to build a synergistic voice that, you know, with how things are going to roll out. But I think, you know, it's safe to say there's definitely going to be potentially longer days and more of a protocol of, you know, different departments and things that who has access to being on the set. You know, if you're working on a bigger set and there's a 50-person crew, obviously not everybody can be on, you know, on the set at the same time. You know, it may have to be lunch breaks that are staggered, you know, different departments that are required to, you know, medical requirements. You know, you may have to get your temperature taken or whatever it is every day, or, you know, slowly phasing back into the normalcy. But I think things like that, you know, expect to see, you know, things relating to health that will affect time and organization of a shoot.
I think we're going to see a lot more one-man band, like what can you produce on your own? And my experience so far is just over the past few weeks, you know, I've started to get a bunch of job inquiries, and it's all kind of along the same path. Like, what do you have access to? How comfortable are you doing this by yourself, or with like an extremely limited crew? So, you know, those are the asks coming towards me. I think we're going to be in that sort of production reality for a long time. So, you know, being comfortable doing things on a very small scale is going to be important moving forward.
I'm going to jump back to Lawrence for a second. What sort of things do you foresee from the rental side of it? Because I know we have a lot of students that are eager to get back in the buildings, get their hands on the gear, go out and shoot. And, you know, just like everyone else, we at Columbia are trying to figure out what does that look like. So I'm sure you've thought about it, but is there anything that that you can share that students or just people that are planning to rent equipment should be thinking about when they schedule a camera prep or a reservation?
Yeah, I mean, we're, you know, I think as we've actually been open for a good amount of this. We've had a number of jobs, as Mike mentioned, a lot of one-man shoots. We've done a few national spots that were literally a DP, director, editor, you know, kind of jack of all. But, you know, I think a lot of it just has to do with, aside from any normal rental, you know, there's just going to be more safety protocols in place, you know, cleaning down cases, making sure things are sanitized, you know, keeping your social distance as necessary, to, you know, as we move gear in and out, it's just going to be a little bit more time consuming and a more, just specific on things like that. But as far as rentals and being able to, like, for example, right now we're doing delivery, you know, free delivery to jobs throughout this month. So, We've had a number of you know, a lot of it's small things and companies. I think for anyone looking for work, I mean, I think there's a lot of companies that are trying, you know, as Mike said, trying to find out who has equipment, and what can you produce. You know, a lot of these companies might have a camera in house, but they might need to still rent some lenses or try to produce something a little bit higher quality than what they're working with in house, because they're used to renting. So for us, it's been a lot of just reminding companies, hey, we're still open if you need, you know, we can rent you out as much as you need when you need it. We just, you know, I think it's been it kind of brought me back a little bit to when I started out. When I, you know, started the rental house out, I was just out of my house in Logan Square, and I've kind of gone full circle where I've had a few jobs where it was easier for me to just like go grab the gear and, you know, have them come pick up at my house. And I'm like, all right, we're back to 10 years ago. But, yeah, no.
So I have a question in the chat here. Do you think it's important for students to be able to do multiple jobs besides just being the DP? And I guess talk about that. That's an open question for everyone.
Yes.
I think that's very important. And you know, just with my story, I started out in G&E and did that for several years, and then I jumped into first day seeing for several years. So it's really valuable to know like those jobs, because then as a DP, you know what you're asking for. If you don't have that experience, you can ask for something completely ridiculous or impossible and not even realize it. So I think that experience is important. Yeah.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. As someone that was acing quite a bit, before I started shooting, I also was able to go into all of these rental houses and have conversations with Lawrence and Panavision and Keslow and really get to know everyone, so that when I did start shooting, I already have this connection with these rental houses, which was really beneficial to me.
I definitely agree with all that too. I also, like both, kind of worked in G&E for a long time, gaffing a number of things for a while, and I think the experience that you gain from that is essential, all right? I mean, especially because that's all part of your job, so you need to know how to light. You also need to know how to work a camera. And I also think it's important, especially for students and when you're first graduating, to just like be humble, because you actually, you know, when you're coming out of film school, I think you kind of, I don't know, you kind of tend to think you know a lot, and you do, but it's a whole crazy world out there. And I think a lot of that, it does teach you how to be humble, and you work on all those jobs. And exactly like Bob said, if you know what you're asking and you know how to do things, you're going to treat your crew with respect, and then the crew is also going to respect you, which is a huge factor in those relationships, and like getting people to do things for you that are not so fun or kind of extreme or difficult or whatever it is. So it's it's pretty important.
So do you guys think that, you know, over the next year with all of these social distancing measures on set, that it's even more important for students to know every job beyond lighting and camera, or maybe just within their departments? Is there more value now moving forward if people are going to be expected to do multiple things on set?
There's definitely a lot of editing jobs. I mean, I don't know how many of you are doing editing as well, but I mean, I think it goes without saying that there's projects that are being edited right now, and you know, without physically being on set, that's a skill set that I know a lot of DPs who also edit have been able to lean into a little bit right now.
I think absolutely, just because like we were all saying before, people are gonna expect, you know, people are expecting things to be produced still. And a lot of that is, a lot more responsibility will fall, you know, on the shoulders of like a DP. If you're shooting something by yourself from your own home, you're the production designer too. So yeah, I think, you know, that's kind of like the reality we're living in right now, and you have to embrace it.
Yeah, I mean, I've always thought that there was value in knowing how to be a producer and an AD and things like that for the DP, because you have to budget, you have to schedule, and you don't have to know how to do all the things they do, but those are valuable skills as a DP that are beyond lighting and camera. Cindy has a question, but Cindy, you can turn on your mic and ask it because
Cindy's here? Holy cow.
Cindy is here.
Hi, Cindy.
Cool.
Hi.
Cindy, are you there? Yeah, I'm just not 100% sure specifically what she wants to know.
I mean, just for question, what are my thoughts on a DIT?
Yeah, like, do you guys, do you work with them, and any suggestions or comments? Because several people here actually have done some DIT, and I think they might want to know how do you interact?
I don't have a DIT every job, and when I do, I really love it because it's amazing. You just kind of feel like someone has your back a little bit more. In terms of how I work with them, you know, usually, so I'm going to use, I don't know if anyone here knows Eric Allman, but I work with Eric a lot as DIT. And usually what will happen is, like, after like the first couple setups, he'll tap me on the shoulder and we'll come over to, you know, his setup, and he'll just kind of show me how he was planning to time the dailies or the proxies or whatever he's transcoding. And so we'll have like a little discussion at his monitor cart, and he'll make sure that, you know, this is along the lines of what I would. I love having a DT, but it feels like luxury.
And we're teaching it now, so
yeah,
it's important in that class for them to be leading with.
So I only have 2 more short questions, and then we can open it up to any other questions.
Hey, Tony?
Yeah.
Can we stay on the DIT for a second?
Yeah, go for it.
So having a DIT, I'm just trying to say we're teaching it now at school. What's important in that class that students leave with?
Like what's important for the DIT students, or what's important for the DP?
We're going to start we have so many more students now that are interested in becoming DITs.
I mean, I guess I would say to that, just really having a good grasp and understanding the tech and the gear. Because, you know, when I work with the DIT, I expect them to know all that stuff, and I expect whatever workflow they've put together to work flawlessly without my input. That's not, you know, I'm not going to tell them how to do their job. So, you know, knowing all that and being able to troubleshoot things that go wrong without bringing it to the DP, because they probably don't have to worry about whatever it is. I think, you know, that would be my answer to that question, at least.
I think it's also important because so much of that is, I don't know, a lot of that depends on taste too. So like what Bob's saying about workflow and all that's important, but I think also like being able to have a few different options, especially if you're setting a look, because every DP is going to kind of want something a little bit different. So in saying the same thing, we're like, it's nice to have a few different options. So if you're like, okay, cool, like this is sort of the LUT we want, and then to not have to like finesse it so much, to not have it be like super wild and out of control. Like it's kind of nice to not have to, I don't know, micromanage someone so much in that case and be like, all right, no, like I need it exactly like this. You know, it's nice to just be like, hey, let's like try something like this. So I think if you have like, I don't know, a few different styles or a bunch of different like options you can bring to it, that's also helpful.
For you, Mike, do you work with a DIT ever before you shoot and commercials and stuff to set a look?
Not typically. No. I mean, you know, I might interact with them in prep a little bit to tell them, you know, what format and all that stuff. Maybe go over the plan, but no, setting looks, not really.
Creating a what?
No, I mean, I feel like I'm pretty, I don't know. I usually just do like a Rec 709, and then if it needs further tweaking, going from there. But I kind of try to keep it simple with the LUT thing. But everyone's different in that too. So.
What about you, Weldon?
Same. I mean, I'm with like Bob as well. It's kind of a luxury for me. So usually when it happens, it's like I don't have a lot of like lead time on the jobs where I do have one. On a few of like the narratives that I've shot, I've had that, and like again, it's just like just budget reasons and all that. There hasn't been a bunch of lead time, so we like set like a rough look, or like after a day or two of the dailies, I'd give some notes on certain things I wanted to change, but we never got to go like super far into it.
Yeah, it can sometimes open up a can of worms, and a lot of productions just would rather not you go down that road. You know, oftentimes they'd rather just have a set look, and then you just kind of continue on with that. But other jobs do call for lots of management of that stuff throughout the production. But again, I think the biggest factor in it is just budget. You know, the DITs are one of the most expensive members of the camera department, and also just being able to have that level of control in the image formation process can add time too, so that, you know, producers are all aware of this stuff and would rather not kind of open that portal up. But it's an immensely helpful tool to be able to use while you're shooting. But yeah, I think it's one of those things it's more often than not out of reach.
Well put.
Yeah, thank you. So, this is an open question. Do any of you have any recommendations of resources that would benefit young cinematographers? Movies, documentaries, books, blogs, websites, anything that you could recommend?
Well, Roger Deakins just came out with a podcast recently.
Oh yeah, Roger Deakins podcast. Listen to that, because that's a good podcast. I've been listening to it. I sometimes like listening to the Wandering DP podcast. That's another good one. Beyond that, though, I don't know, just kind of keeping in touch with the forums here and there. I don't really have a lot of recommendations here, unfortunately.
Yeah, CML is a good forum to be on. There's a lot of industry folks. You know, there's good trade magazines, ICG, AC. You know, no, I mean, I think there's a lot of, depending on what you're trying to do. You know, if you're trying to work on TV shows or features or commercials or corporate or weddings or music videos, I mean, depending on the nature of those shoots, those types of people congregate in different ways in different places. So I think it's just knowing the market that you want to lean in towards or try and get in with. To some degree, there's a bit of that. There's obviously overlap across the board, but
I think it's a good idea. Like if you find a cinematographer that you like, I mean, the world we live in now is pretty amazing, especially in pandemic times. You can follow them on Instagram, and a lot of them are giving talks because everyone's got a lot of free time. So that's something like very personal that you can do. And I'd also highly recommend, I don't know, like keeping some kind of journal, whether it's like actually that you're writing it down and taking notes on films that you like, or just pulling grabs from things that you actually enjoy and stuff that you would like aspire to shoot. And that's always really helpful to get in the mindset of strictly visual, and also like obviously the most important part, the story. So if you see a film that you like, you know, pull some stills from it, analyze it a little bit. And that's something that's helped me a lot, like grow my skill set and also get jobs sometimes, because it's really nice to have that catalog and be able to meet up with the director and have them pitch a project to you and be like, oh, I have this great idea. This reminds me of this film. You should watch this. This is applicable to your ideas. You know?
Yeah, I'll second that, Weldon. That's a good call. Like just creating like an inspo lookbook folder for you with like, you know, if you watch something you like the way it looks, like screen cap it, put it in the folder and just like categorize it. That way, if you're ever making a mood board for someone, you just like have a ton of images you just call from right there. And you can even go, I sometimes go one step further. I'll take those images, I'll put them into like Resolve, and I'll look at like the waveforms and like where the levels are and everything and be like, oh, that's really, you know, I think, yeah, like self-study is a really big part of it for sure.
And then I'm also a big proponent of just consuming other types of art too, because it can really inspire you. And right now they have a lot of online exhibits for a bunch of the museums that you could be looking at. But I always see that like not entirely focusing on like cinematography and like taking a break and looking at just like the world around you can also help grow your art form in a way. So it's okay to like not be so focused in all the time.
Yeah, read a book. Look outside the window.
Take a gap year.
That's what I do.
Take a gap year.
So does anyone else have any questions? We're going to start winding down here. Let's see. Well, that's not, that's just some info from John Takota. A lot of episodic DPs have been giving talks on gocreativeshow.com on Instagram Live and recording them. So check that out. That's in the chat. Are there any other questions from anyone?
Yeah, I got one.
Yes.
That me. So how much, since you all went to school together, how much did that play into staying in Chicago?
I'd say it was a pretty big factor. Everybody I work with is somehow related to people I went to school with, for the most part. I feel like there was a time, I mean, I think it's still like this, where every few years there would be like a giant migration of people to either LA or New York, or just out of Chicago in general, where people would kind of clump together and move. And I know a lot of those groups are still working together out in LA. Yeah, huge swaths of like the movie and TV world out in Chicago of the people who were doing the biggest stuff were originally groups and crews that formed at Columbia. But the reason I stuck around was a lot of the people I worked with stuck around, and a lot of those folks are here in this chat right now. So I think that was a huge factor, was we all started getting work and we all started giving work to each other. So we just like, you know, I wouldn't have been able to stay in Chicago. I didn't expect to stay in Chicago, honestly, but it just kind of worked out.
The reason I brought it up is because you're all around the same time.
Mm-hmm.
Students now do the same thing. And I talked to once in a while with someone in LA, and their whole crews are Columbia students.
It is really, it's a good thing to bring up, because it is true. Like the people that's exactly my experience. Like I work with all of like my best friends all the time, which is really wonderful. And I think the community I can speak to, I don't know so much in New York or in LA, but the community here is really amazing. And I think like all of us, like your fellow DPs or fellow gaffers or fellow ACs, whoever it is, they're like really great, and you all will like share jobs and recommend each other constantly. And that's kind of this nice piece that I find here. It's not so much, it's not very competitive in that way. So if it's like, whatever, if I have a job that I get offered for and I can't do it, or I'm not the right fit for it or whatever, like I call Corey or I call Bo, and vice versa. And it's that kind of like community is really priceless. So I think take a good look around at the people you're working with now, because they'll probably be very important to the future.
Yeah, and I think that's definitely a case, is like, to reiterate their points, is like everyone that's here now at one time or another, like I've been hired on by them, or probably hired them onto a shoot that I'm doing or what have you. And those relationships were started when we were in school at Columbia. Because the other thing too is like we knew how we worked together. So you continue that working relationship. And this is like a really important thing too, that like not just in hiring on your own crew, but when you're getting hired, is people want to work with the people that they like. You know, like it's not just your skill level. I mean, if you have a terrible personality and you're hard to work with, like I don't want to hire that person on. You know, it's like you're gonna be spending hours on end each day on set with these people. You're gonna want to work with people that you get along with and enjoy working with.
Yeah, you're with the crew more than you are your pillow.
Yeah.
Yeah, all true stuff. Yeah, when I used to freelance a little bit more, I think 90% of the work was with you guys. So yeah, I mean, it carries on for years and years after school.
And there's also another thing with that too, is like when, you know, like Weldon was mentioning, as far as like, you know, if he can't take a job, he's recommending one of us, is like, it's important to have those relationships too, to like recommend, if like one of your regular clients calls you up, but you're booked, and they're like, can you recommend somebody else? is that you have someone that you can know and trust to do a good job to recommend to that client, because that's a reflection on you as far as like your recommendation as well. So it's important to have those relationships.
I'm not going to try to steal your job, your connection.
So I differ a little bit on this one because most of my peers actually moved to LA. And I've noticed that I work with a lot of you guys, especially starting out with, which was definitely a Columbia base, but my shooting base, I started working with a lot of Northwestern graduates, more on the producing and directing and writing side. And I found these other smaller groups of people that have a film community here, like OTV and Van Studios, that I really found a connection with to shoot with. So a little different in that I'm not really shooting for a lot of directors or producers or people that I worked with in Columbia, but I'm still working and finding those creative outlets that like I really enjoy working with. So even if you don't find yourself working with people that you think like you fit with at school, or your friends are all moving, there's still areas that you can find work and people that you find interesting to work with in Chicago.
I think that's a good point. It always comes down to you have to find your people. You have to find your tribe. And sometimes that's at school and sometimes it's not.
Your network constantly evolves too. I mean, it's like, you know, what's the metaphor? Like there's a hole in the bottom of the cup and you have to keep refilling it, you know. The group of people and clients that I work with now is like completely different from, you know, even just a few years ago. So that's going to change throughout your career.
I have a quick question that's in the chat. Do any of you have any tips about managing student debt?
Bo,
Not
didn't you
not
win
much you
it in
can
a
do.
poker game? I remember that story.
That helped. Don't listen to that advice, but that's a good question. It's a tough one. I mean, everyone's different. You got to do it your own way. You know, you can defer, but if we're talking about like financial stuff, that's a whole other discussion. But to put it, you know, like in the quick way is like, yes, you have to pay down your debt, and you should prioritize that. That should be the first thing that you work towards getting off your back. But you know, everyone's financial situation is different. Obviously, you have to pay rent, you have to do all this and that. But you know, that's kind of what I did. I made it a very important thing to work that down as soon as I could. So.
Yeah, and maybe going back to your other question you had earlier, Tony, about, you know, other jobs. I mean, I think there is an opportunity if you have the network and, you know, you can do other jobs. Don't limit yourself to just shooting. Especially if debt is something that you should have a concern and real responsibility to focus on right now. You know, and don't let that get you down that like you're not going to be a DP. You know, for some people it takes, you know, decades before they're shooting what they want to be shooting. And, you know, as long as you're staying involved in the industry, you know, I've seen a number of DPs and, you know, camera assistants, everyone across the map who've gone into the industry thinking they were going to do one thing and slowly found that, I actually like being a lens technician at a rental house, or I like working the post side. You know, I think there's just a lot of avenues in the industry that maybe at Columbia, like we're trained to be DPs in a sense. So I think just don't limit yourself to the possibilities and having a fruitful life and career in the industry. There's a lot that you can do and still be really happy and find that lifestyle. But yeah, while you're managing debt, especially, you know, don't be too closed-minded about that, but also don't let it, you know, create a wall for you to be a DP.
That was a really good point, and I'll just like add to that. You know, early on, I was having kind of a tough go of it, and for a moment, I was really looking into becoming a producer at an ad agency, because I saw these people on set, and I thought, you know, I was just kind of interested in it. So that's a road that I very seriously looked into going down, and I think that's fine. You know, you just adapt.
I think with all of it too, to like take it back to what we were speaking to earlier, all of it everything influences everything else. So that's the beauty of it, where like, even as Jana was saying, like if you're looking at art in an art museum, that's also going to influence your craft. So if you're like, shooting stuff as a DP and trying to do that, and then you're taking editing jobs and doing all these other things, like none of that's going to like hold you back, right? It's all going to kind of like teach you more and influence like the greater picture of what you're going to shoot, or like Lawrence was saying, what you may end up deciding that you want to do. So I think that's important to keep in mind too. Like, just because you're trying to pay off debt or whatever, you're not like shooting as much as you want to shoot, and you're doing other things. They're all kind of contributing to the greater goal still.
Real quick, I got one more question in the chat. Could any of you touch a bit on union work versus non-union work, and if one or the other can get you stuck in a certain job type?
That's a big one. I feel like we could talk for a while about that. Definitely when we all graduated, I think there was more of a kind of split between those, or, there was a lot of people who did both here in Chicago, because there was like a finite amount of union work to do. So, and this was a conversation I had with my union rep when I first joined, all my contacts are non-union, and that's all the work I do currently. Like, I'm only getting a handful of union jobs. Like, why, or how am I going to make that transition? And do I even want to? Because, I've built relationships with these folks, and this is all they do. So I think no matter what anybody says, there's kind of always a place for the smaller non-union jobs, especially if it's the kind of stuff that you want to be doing. And I never kind of stopped doing that stuff, because it was almost always more of the thing that I wanted to be doing, was non-union, smaller budget, kind of for the sake of art pieces, but that ends up being an enormous part of the negotiation as you guys leave Columbia and go out into the world. And I think, especially now, I mean, we'll see with the virus and everything, but the climate as it was prior to this thing happening, it was very likely that if you guys left Columbia, that you could just go directly into a union world and just, stay in that niche, in that little kind of TV ladder, and start as a utility and move your way up and all that. I think it's another one of those really highly personal questions, but I think anybody who says that they're only going to do, only participate in one side of it is limiting themselves. And nowadays there is the ability to just do union commercials or union TV or union movies in Chicago if you want to. But I think it's a great big world to kind of explore outside of that as well. And I think keeping your profile as well-rounded as possible. I think it does matter, those things, the distinction between the two. It does matter in terms of like holding on to some of that and progressing through it, as well as, introducing yourself to this union landscape and then progressing through that as well.
Great, thank you. Well, I think we can start winding down if there aren't any other questions. If you do have questions that you think of later, you can send an email, and I can contact these guys, and yeah, we can take it from there. Thank you so much to all of you for giving your time, being here. Yeah, this is something we've been trying to do for a long time, and it's one of those things that's, the silver lining of this whole pandemic thing is I don't know if we would have ever gotten all 6 of you in the same room at the same time. Maybe 40 years from now when everyone retires, like I think it would have been impossible. So this is one of the good things that's come from it, and I'm really grateful for all of you. And I miss seeing all of you in person.
Yeah, it's really good to see all of you guys. So hello, including the students.
Hello.
Yeah, likewise.
So yeah, this was really
So
great.
if you want to stick around for a few minutes, go ahead. Tar.
Yeah, if you guys want to stick around, we can just kind of hang out and shoot the shit. I'm gonna stop the recording for that because that's really educational. So yeah, if you guys have to take off, if anyone has to take off, go ahead. But again, thank you for being here, and you know, hopefully we can do this again face to face soon.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks.
Thanks for doing it.
Thank you.